Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for sacrificing your last session of the day for this topic. I hope it's going to be relevant and productive for all of you. My name is Irina Filippova, as Walter has mentioned. I spent my career in the energy sector, starting in oil and gas, so both upstream and downstream, and transitioning to renewable energy about 17 years ago. So I've been on this journey for quite some time in electric mobility since 2019, which makes me almost a veteran in this young, budding industry. Our topic today is all around challenges and opportunities in fleet electrification, and I hope that it's going to be relevant for those of you in the room who are looking to electrify your fleets. May I ask for a show of hands for those of you who have electrified any component of your fleet or your client's fleet? Not bad. Great. Fantastic. Anyone who is still considering potentially going on this journey? Yes. Excellent. Well, and those who are in neither one of those two groups, hopefully your minds will be changed after today's session. We'll see. Let's make it as interactive as possible. Please do feel free to ask questions. Even though we have 15 minutes at the end of the session, if you have a burning question to ask, I think Walter is all prepared to come to you with a mic so we can get the question on the record. As Walter has mentioned, I represent Electrada. We are a company who provides electric fuel to fleets. To some of you, this may be a little bit misleading because the word fuel means liquid fuels typically. Well, we think of electric fuel as, today we think about conventional fuel as well, in a sense that it should be as ubiquitous, as accessible, and as reliable as conventional fuel. We are a 360 charging as a service company, which means that what we provide to fleets is that outcome, that product called electric fuel, so that you don't have to worry about what type of charging infrastructure to deploy at your depot sites, how to select it, and how to, most importantly, ensure that it's reliable. We work with all types of fleets in terms of classes of vehicles and in terms of geography all across North America. So we have a pretty wide range of experiences working with different types of customers. We started the company in 2019, and the impetus for that was a ubiquitous and overwhelming commitment on the part of automotive OEMs to transition to electrifying vehicles, road vehicles primarily. So that commitment to us meant that we actually could venture into this space, focusing primarily on the reliability of charging infrastructure. That has been our company's DNA from day one, and this continues to be the case today. Early on, we've partnered with Ferguson Enterprises and started serving their customers pretty much out of the gate. Other partners include Duke Energy and Daimler Trucks North America, among others. Some of our customers are some of the largest fleets in the land. And while this is still a new process for many of them, we realize that the organizational commitment to electrify actually takes a very broad ecosystem effort on the part of all stakeholders interested in electrification to make it happen. What's a little bit different about Electrada is that we don't necessarily come purely from the transportation sector. And the reason for that is because what we provide, electric fuel, requires expertise in the utilities, in energy management, in all types of energy technology assets, in real estate, in commercial real estate management, and of course in engineering and project management. So we bring all these different facets and skill sets to our organization so that we remove all risk and all capital cost from fleets in terms of electrifying. We live by our values: listen, learn, trust, transform. We believe that in this nascent industry, it's very, very important to pay attention to our customers' needs and requirements. Very often, when you're dealing with something new, a new technology, a new market, we don't stop to listen. And then customers get into situations that they regret getting into. We believe in truly listening to the customer from day one, understanding their requirements, understanding what success looks like to them, learning from that, building that trust to help them transform their fleets and electrifying successfully. This is just a small illustration of some of our customers today. These are all working sites all across the US, predominantly in California. Not surprisingly, I'll be talking about one of them, Ferguson Enterprises, in just a minute. And as I've mentioned, partnering with Daimler, Hitachi Energy, NRG, Holman, Duke Energy are just some of the examples of some of the larger partners that we bring to the table in terms of solving the electrification dilemmas on behalf of our customers. All right, now closer to what's near and dear to your heart. What are the challenges of fleet operators in considering electrification? Well, the first challenge is the fact that EV charging infrastructure is a very, very complex set of problems. We're not talking about chargers as just appliances. These are energy assets that require to be deployed in connection with that specific fleet use case. Yeah, so we're not just buying appliances of a procurement sales sheet. We're looking at the specific fit between the vehicle, that vehicle's use case, the routes, the mileage that that vehicle is going to be putting on every day, and what type of charging infrastructure is required to keep that vehicle reliably charged, to make that electric fuel available to you. And as always, we have to reflect on who we as fleet operators are and what types of skill sets do we have. Energy management hasn't traditionally been part of our skill sets, and I've heard from a lot of fleet operators today here at the conference that this is not something that they necessarily know how to do or have the skill set, required skill set in the organization, having to source that skill set from somewhere else, having to learn it. This is a huge organizational hurdle to overcome because, of course, the resources aren't always available for that. Moreover, there's a lot of risk associated with venturing into essentially a whole new industry where there's a lot of capital risk that's hanging in the balance. Quite a few organizations have undertaken pilots in fleet electrification, and while pilots could seem easy, scaling electrification of fleets across different sites and different depots could prove extremely challenging. Moreover, as a new technology, EV charging infrastructure does not provide reliability across the board. So to ensure that reliability, one needs to really truly have tested and understood how these charging assets are going to be performing at their sites. And this is part of what we do. In looking at some of the customers' feedback as to what the barriers to commercial EV adoption are, we've noticed that obviously not having sufficient capital to deploy charging infrastructure is one of the leading obstacles to scaled electrification, but also not fully understanding all the components required, from the timeline to the cost to the technology in question. All of those barriers combined together can make it feel like a hurdle that is too difficult to overcome. At the same time, electric fuel represents about 40% over the total cost of ownership of electric vehicle assets. And that's a very sizable proportion. Again, this is not something that is talked about a lot in the industry, but if you think about it and consider all the capital requirements for those assets to be charged, that's the true balance between the vehicle and the charging infrastructure. And I've mentioned that I'm going to be talking about one of our customers, Ferguson Enterprises. Please. That's a great question, because with the ICE vehicles, you're not actually deploying, sorry, the question was if electric fuel represent 40% of the TCO in terms of the proportion of cost of electrification, how does it compare to the ICE vehicle costs? The ICE vehicle costs are your operating cost. You're not investing any capital, right? So that is the fundamental difference in terms of this being an operating cost versus capital expenditure. The Shells and BPs and Exxons of this world are not asking you to invest in their fueling gas stations, right? However, you're expected to make that investment at your depots on your property, leased or owned. And that is the fundamental difference, is that that capital requirement may be a bit too much for the fleet to undertake. Because again, this is not something that is necessarily provided for in a lot of the budgets. Even if you are receiving, for example, a grant for a vehicle, that vehicle's cost may absorb most of the grant funds. So you don't necessarily have any left over for your infrastructure. I hope I answered the gentleman's question. He left. In terms of the actual customer case study, always relevant to look at how a fleet out there has done it. Well, one of our first customers, Ferguson Enterprises, a great company based on Newport News. I don't know if the gentleman from Newport News is here. Yes, thank you. So yes, it's a $29 billion distributor of plumbing and HVAC supplies, working with a network of about 1 million customers, has about 5,300 units in their fleet that consumes about 8 million gallons of diesel annually. Ferguson has undertaken the first wave of electrification across 5 sites in California, not surprisingly. We'll talk a little bit about California as a special case, with 30 vehicles. These were all Class 6 and Class 8 vehicles, a mix of the two, across those 5 sites, working with PACCAR and DTNA, so Peterbilts and eCascadias and EM2s. Very interesting case study, a very patient learner, this particular customer, and a partner to us in many respects. Again, a company that's interested in learning all of the components of electrification and doing so patiently. Great to have a partner like that going through the early stages of electrification. We've deployed both level 2 and DC fast charging infrastructure at those 5 sites with an aggregate demand of about 1.3 megawatt of power. And the utilities that we've worked with, it was SMUD in Sacramento, SC in Southern California, and PG&E. For those of you who might have done it yourselves, especially in California, those names will sound very familiar. Both SC and PG&E have been very early to the electrification programs, have pretty robust processes already underway, and of course have a lot of demand from fleets in California, obviously because of the regulatory pressure, and also about, from given the appetite for electrification in California. The number one benefit that we've provided to Ferguson, of course, has been the reliability of charging infrastructure. We've delivered over 99%, 99.4% uptime to that customer. And a little bit later on, I'll talk about what that 99% truly represents in terms of hours. But if you are looking at the full year, we have about 8,760 hours in a year. So 1% downtime actually means about 88 hours per year. That's not a lot. I'm curious what the reliability of those of you who have deployed charging at your sites might be. I would probably venture a guess that it's not 99%. And that's not surprising. Again, this is a nascent technology market and one that has not been built on reliability as an absolute prerequisite for charging infrastructure to be available. Fuel certainty. Another component that we offer is a fixed charging as a service rate that is determined on the per mile basis, on the per kWh basis, so the customer knows how much they're paying for electric fuel. That is essentially a locked fuel contract for the entirety of our work together. So, say for 5 years. And that fuel price is determined on a locational basis for each of the sites. Risk mitigation doesn't just mean the fact that we provide our own capital and therefore that's our capital that's at risk. It also means all the technology that we deploy, we're responsible for its performance. Therefore, if we make a poor choice of that technology, the risk of that poor choice is going to be on us, not on you as a customer. What this amounts to is tremendous savings from the customer's perspective in terms of their own organizational investment in electrification, in terms of training their own employees to run energy assets, which they don't necessarily have any experience in doing, in terms of being exposed to high electricity rates, which we back up in our contracts, and looking at kind of a long-term savings as well from the TCO perspective. And lastly, in terms of alignment, what's very important to understand is that in the nascent market, there's a lot of technology, new technology available, and you might be tempted to try it out. And folks are selling you technology, hardware, software, oftentimes without that SLA in place. What that means is that your long-term interests may not be fully aligned with your supplier, which is why we set up a partnership, in a sense that our long-term interests are entirely aligned with our customers. So this charging as a service or electric fuel solution, what does it really mean? What it does come down to? Well, as mentioned, we capitalize 100% of all energy infrastructure costs. There's no small print. We never say that we cover X but not Y. We cover the entirety of what it takes to deploy those energy assets at a depot site. We guarantee contractually the 99% uptime. And I want to make sure that resonates with the room, because you won't find any charging manufacturer out there who would guarantee 99% uptime. And I'll explain in a minute how we actually are doing that. That is provided with industry-leading SLAs. Again, as described, the predictable fuel cost, that fuel contract, with everything included on the operations and maintenance side. So all of that amounts to a fixed charging as a service rate on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis, or per mile basis, however you like. What it means is that in this complex ecosystem of partners, some of whom provide the vehicle, some of whom provide vehicle financing, some of whom provide vehicle maintenance and operations, some of whom provide software around fleet operations and management, and some of whom provide various components of energy infrastructure. We take all of that and break it down into 3 components. Vehicle provided through our OEM or FMC partner, software provided through our fleet management software partner, and Electrada providing everything that's in the dark blue part of this donut. Very hard to do on your own if you're a fleet manager and dealing with all of these components on your own. So what this essentially means is that charging as a service, as a solution, is much more favorable to either doing it yourself or contracting turnkey services, which means that there is no reliability provision, there's no 99% uptime performance guarantee provision, nor is there capitalization of that infrastructure that someone else undertakes. nor the long-term alignment that we talked about earlier. This means that we have to truly understand the use case in each given fleet operation. And that may differ from site to site. So if you operate multi-site fleets, what we're going to provide you with is a charging as a service rate for each of those sites. Some of you run mixed fleets. Some of you run slightly different use cases at those sites. And even if they're exactly identical, which almost never happens, the actual site conditions may be different. Electric rates may be different at those sites. So the charging as a service rate will be locational, will be specific to that location based on our evaluation of what it's going to take to electrify vehicles there. To ensure reliability, we have a fairly complex back end. I know a lot of you in the earlier discussion this morning at the panel, we talked about data and the importance of data management. And to a lot of you, data represents a very valuable and new area of study, as it were, when it comes to fleet electrification. So what we do is we bring charging management, energy management, and fleet management into a single integrated platform from which we then report out the KPIs that are important to you, to your fleet, to your organization, with as much frequency as you'd like. Obviously, ensuring that 99% performance uptime. As mentioned, critical reliability is not something that is easily found in the marketplace. A recent study from Berkeley University found that non-Tesla DC fast chargers in the public environment perform at about 73% uptime. And this is in the San Francisco and the Bay Area, which is the earliest and highest adoption market in the United States. 73%. Not reliable and untenable for a fleet operation, which is why, again, we insist on the 99%, which is basically your utility grade reliability when you think about comparisons. So as mentioned, we start truly with the customer journey, trying to understand how important is electrification for this customer. What are they prepared to do? How much they're prepared to electrify, and where, early on. Helping them high grade and prioritize sites, understand which vehicles they're choosing and for what reason, whom they're working with as their vehicle providers, as their OEMs and FMCs. Maybe gleaning something from our prior experience around those vehicles. That's the engagement piece, when we actually study the use case and we prepare the pricing proposal to the customer, then execute the contract. Secondly, we actually design a solution that fits, again, that reliability requirement for those customers' vehicles. We energize, meaning that the infrastructure goes live. In a lot of cases, we get a request, what I would call at the 11th hour. The customer is saying, we actually have trucks coming in a couple of months. Can you help us with infrastructure? Again, underestimating just how long it takes to ensure that reliable solution can be put in place. Utility timelines are often in excess of 12 months, certainly in California. Right, so we prefer to start working with the customer early on at the point where they're actually making a decision about electrification of their vehicles. Once we've energized, we train the customer on how to operate the charging infrastructure. We work hand in hand with the automotive OEM provider, with the FMC partner, to ensure that drivers are trained. Otherwise, a lot of this infrastructure is going to cause discomfort in operation, right? It's going to be something new that folks have not been onboarded to operating properly. The way in which we think about the operational blueprint is we divide the 24-hour period into 4 components. At the end of the day, the driver comes back to depot and plugs in. The charge window doesn't necessarily start when the vehicle got plugged in. because that may or may not be the optimal charge time. The charge window starts when the best electric rates are available. So as an example, if the driver comes back to depot at 6 o'clock, clocks out, plugs in the vehicle, the electrons don't start flowing to that vehicle until after 9 p.m., especially in the time of use rates in California. All of that is managed remotely. Through that charge window, usually overnight, we observe, the state of charge of the vehicle, whether there are any issues with charging, all of that, again, remote diagnostic and troubleshooting. Then the driver comes back in the morning to start their morning shift. All I have to make sure of is that the battery is fully charged to that state of charge that is desired, and go on their day. So their daily route is essentially the time when they're not charging. We don't rely typically on public charging, whether or not it's available, so that we ensure, again, that that battery can be fully operated during the time that the driver is out doing their daily routes. This works primarily for depots and for the vehicles with the current battery availability. Again, the 99% reliability means about 22 hours a quarter of downtime. That's not a lot, which means that the way in which we run our operations and maintenance is very, very structured and very much choreographed. We typically stage spares, both parts and units on site. We rip and replace level 2 chargers if there are hardware issues, and in all cases we respond in under 4 hours, day and night, 24/7, 365. Again, looking at the overall project milestones, it's important to be cognizant of just how long it takes to get through project implementation, project deployment. And there are a lot of forces at play in terms of utility and permitting authorities, and really working across the ecosystem to ensure that all the partners are aligned in bringing the system on stream. We've heard of lots of cases of fleets trying to kind of get the operations going, only to find their vehicles stranded or their charging infrastructure stranded, waiting for their vehicles to come. So what we try to do is align the site live dates with vehicle availability dates, which again is important, that we would work together with a fleet owner or a fleet manager to actually understand when the vehicles are coming and get engaged in the early stages of that process. We provide weekly reporting in terms of how we're doing vis-a-vis our timelines through simple dashboards, again, to just orient the customer and be perfectly transparent on where we are in the process, all the way through to site operational. Site operational for us is when the customer has been fully trained on both the charging infrastructure and the new electric vehicle. So in short, these are some of the benefits that the charging as a service provides. One, it's fully capitalized. So the capital is ours. We actually invested in the infrastructure that we've selected. I will say that selecting the right types of chargers is not just a price point. It's a process. We, for example, have a lab where we test all the chargers for interoperability with vehicles, as well as interoperability with our back end, so that the customer is not surprised and we're not experimenting on the customer site. If we bring a solution to the customer site, this means that we have fully tested it. And we don't have any more questions remaining about the reliability, and we can ensure that 99%, that's the performance part. The guaranteed reduced cost per mile obviously translates into the kind of the easier and the more predictable way of working with fixed CaaS price upfront. We talked about the lower operational risk, again, taking all of the risk components off the table to enable the fleet customer to focus on what they do best, that is transportation and logistics, and not having to worry about whether or not their vehicles are going to be charged in the morning to run their shifts. And of course, long-term success. how do we align and make sure that we're not there just creating something, that short-term solution, and then walking away. The fact that we serve the customer over the term of our agreement for the entire time, be it 5 years or 10 years, means that we're there every step of the way. And we ensure that that operation is fully managed from the reliability perspective. So these are all the prepared remarks that I had today just to introduce charging as a service as a concept. I know it's sometimes new, especially to public entities who are used to owning charging infrastructure and the vehicles, haven't necessarily had a lot of experience outsourcing. So hopefully this is useful context.